So let's talk about resources today. What are resources? So anything that we obtain from our environment, from our surroundings, that we use to satisfy our needs and requirements, that is called as resources. So which is technologically accessible, that means we can attain it easily, and also economically feasible, that means each and every individual can afford and can obtain it, and culturally acceptable, that means we need to get it, obtain it easily. So anything which is available to us for our needs and requirements, that is called as a resource. We obtain these resources from our environment, which involves a lot of interaction between technology and transformation of these resources into useful things. Anything which is present in the environment can be converted into a resource with the help of technology and institutions which do that, because human beings have transformed the natural resources, the natural materials that we obtain from the nature into resources. Human beings themselves are resources because they have transformed the natural environment into resources by means of technology. So they themselves are an important component of resources. They have transformed all the materials which are available in the nature into useful products, and they themselves are changing the environment. So they are a very important part of the nature. So now we talk about the classification of resources. Now resources can be broadly divided into two parts: biotic resources and abiotic resources. So all the living resources which are biological in nature, they are biotic resources, and the ones which are non-living are abiotic, that we will be discussing further. On the basis of exhaustibility, they are divided into renewable and non-renewable or non-exhaustible. So, basically, on the basis of ownership, we divide them into individual or community, national, and international. And on the basis of status of development, that means how amount or what amount of resources are developed and can be used, they are divided into potential, developed, stock, as well as reserves. Let's discuss the types of resources. The first is biotic resources and abiotic resources based upon the origin of resources. So basically those resources which are living, like the flora and the fauna, human beings are also part of it. All those resources which are part of the biosphere which are living, so they are basically biotic, like plants, animals, human beings, fishes, birds, livestock, etc. And all those resources which are man made, maybe, or they are non living, they are part of abiotic resources, like soil, water, minerals, rocks, metals, anything which is of use for us, for our sustenance, and they are non living, they are basically abiotic resources which we find in the environment itself, and they are naturally produced. So, on the basis of exhaustibility, that means how much we are using it, how we are using it, it can be divided into resources like renewable resources and non renewable resources. So, renewable resources are the resources which can be renewed or it can be reproduced back once we have used it physically. Okay, and it can be easily renewed back or replenished back in the environment, like the trees or water, then solar energy, wind energy, which is non exhaustible or which can be renewed back continuously in the nature, okay, which is in a continuous flow. Whereas non renewable resources are the ones, once we have used it, they cannot be replenished or cannot be reproduced, they get depleted. Examples are coal, petroleum, natural gas, fossil fuels. So they cannot be easily recycled or reproduced. Once we have exhausted, it completely gets lost or it completely gets depleted, and it takes millions of years again to be reformed. Then, on the basis of ownership, that means who is owning that resource, we are dividing it into individual resources. So, individual resource means the ones which are privately owned by individuals, like the farmers, they own their own land, or if you own a house or you have your own land, okay, that is an individual ownership or an individual resource. So any resource owned by an individual is individual resource. and community owned resource, which is actually owned by a community or a group of people. So when the village uh, people, they own something like common burial grounds or village ponds or a market, so that is a community owned resource, so which is used by the people of those communities. If you're living in a society or a village or any community, you can own that particular resource, and it is shared between all the members of that particular community. Then, on the basis of ownership, we have national resources. So, any resource which belongs to the nation, which can be used by the citizens of that nation, is national resource. So, it can be the water bodies, the roads, the railways, any kind of developmental project, irrigation, forest, wildlife, land, property, political boundaries. So, which comes within that boundary of the nation, all those resources, whether natural resources or man made resources, within the territory of that country is the national resource. Now, the international resource. There are some resources which are shared between two nations or three nations depending upon their collateral relations. So there are some international institutions which take care of all these resources which are shared between two continents or two countries, like the EEC, that is exclusive economic zone. So oceanic resources which are beyond 200 nautical miles of any country, that is included in exclusive economic zone, where it is an open ocean, where an individual country cannot use all the resources. They have to follow some regulations which are being implemented by these international institutions. So there's some limitations in which they can use these resources. So the marine resources which we are using internationally, they are being regulated properly by international institutions. Then, on the basis of the status of development, that means what is the amount of development of that particular resource, it can be divided into potential resources, developed resources, stock, and reserves. Now, what is potential resource? Now, any region must have abundance of resources which are not presently being utilized, or they are not fully utilized, but they have got a lot of potentiality. So, if we basically use that resource in a better way, or we use more technology, then we can actually use that resource in a better way. So like Rajasthan and Gujarat region has a lot of potential of solar energy, because it has got a lot of insulation or solar energy. So this region has got a lot of potentiality. So if you channelize the potential and use the technology, and use the right technology to basically utilize the resources, then it can also be preserved and it can be used in a better way in the future. Then we have the developed resources which have already been surveyed, or they have been explored, and they have been used to their full potential. So they have been utilized to the maximum level. For example, we have got coal and petroleum, natural gas, and other kinds of metals which have been developed, and we also have the right technology to utilize them to the maximum level, that is called as developed resources. Then there are some stock reserves. That means that those resources which are there in the environment, in the nature, but we still do not have the technology to utilize them. We are still lacking behind the technology. We have not got the access to those technologies, or the technology has not developed as yet. So maybe in the future it will be developed, only then we can use those resources. So water, which is composed of hydrogen and oxygen. Now we do know that hydrogen is used for energy and oxygen can be used for breathing and for burning and other purposes, but we do not have the advanced technical know-how or technology to divide the water into hydrogen and oxygen, or to extract hydrogen and oxygen from them in a commercial way, because the technology is yet to be developed. So this resource is actually a stock which can be used in the future. So the last type of resource are the reserves. Reserves are those resources which we preserve it, or we reserve it for the future. Even if we have the technical know-how, or we have the technology to develop them and to use them to the maximum potential, but still we preserve it for the future, so that they are not completely exhausted, because these are the resources which takes
millions and thousands of years to be formed. So once it gets depleted, it will not be recycled again. That is why we need to have some reserves, like the coal reserve